In the quiet moments when you no longer send the message, no longer dial his number, something unusual begins to happen. Not outside of you, but within you. You begin to feel the space where his presence used to live. And in that space, something deeper is born, your awareness. That awareness does not cry out, it does not beg, it simply observes. And the man, sensing that shift, feels it too. Not through your words, but through the silence that echoes louder than anything you ever said. There's a truth often hidden beneath the surface of our daily interactions, especially in relationships where emotions move faster than clarity. When you stop texting and calling a man, something profound begins to unfold. It is not merely an action of stepping back, it's a release of energy, a shift in direction, a rebalancing of something that may have gone unnoticed for far too long. Most people operate from a place of habit, and in relationships, that habit becomes emotional overfunctioning, especially when one feels unseen or undervalued. It starts subtly. You're the one who checks in first, the one who initiates, the one who ensures the connection doesn't fade, and somewhere along the way, the energy begins to tilt. One gives more, the other receives. But when giving becomes relentless, it turns into pursuing. And that pursuit, no matter how well intended, alters the dynamic. Eastern philosophy teaches that balance governs the universe. In nature, when one force becomes too dominant, its opposite will rise to restore equilibrium. Fire consumes, but eventually the rain will fall. Rivers carve through rock, but over time the mountain settles. In relationships, this balance is no different. When you are always the one reaching out, you become the river constantly flowing, while the other becomes the still stone receiving. The movement stops feeling mutual. The energy loses its rhythm. There's a principle known as energetic balance. It's not about control or games. It's about recognizing when the flow of energy is no longer reciprocal. When one is too available, the other becomes too accustomed. And when you decide to pull back, not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet clarity, you offer the relationship a rare and necessary pause. That pause, uncomfortable as it may feel at first, is often the very space needed for truth to surface. Think of a pendulum. If it swings too far in one direction, it must return with equal force to the other. By stepping back from constant communication, you're not creating distance. You're restoring the natural swing of connection. You're allowing the other person to feel the absence. And in that absence, reflect. Sometimes people don't realize your value while you're present, but your absence speaks in ways your presence never could. There's a story about a woman named Clara who had been dating someone for several months. She was thoughtful, consistent, and genuinely cared, but she always initiated. Every morning began with her text. Every weekend plan was her idea. Every question about emotional connection came from her. The man responded, but never led. Clara felt tired, not from love, but from imbalance. One day, after sitting quietly with herself, she chose silence, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. For the first time, she didn't send the morning message. She didn't follow up on unanswered calls. The first day passed with no word. Then the second. On the third day, she received a message. "I've been thinking about you. Everything okay?" And just like that, the energy began to shift. Not because she manipulated him, but because she returned to her center. She allowed the dynamic to breathe. The space became a mirror. In that stillness, the man saw the imbalance he had grown used to. And what followed wasn't just his message. It was his awareness. This is not a formula. It's not a technique. It's a return to nature's wisdom. The moment you stop forcing, you stop distorting. You allow what is truly meant for you to find its way without being pushed. chased, or begged. And this truth is not limited to romance. It applies to friendships, family, even professional connections. Neuroscience supports this ancient knowing. The brain responds more intensely to anticipation than to gratification. It's the anticipation of reward, not the reward itself, that activates dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for desire and motivation. When something is always available, the brain becomes desensitized. But when availability is interrupted, even temporarily, the mind begins to reawaken to value. Imagine receiving a gift every day. At first, there's excitement, curiosity, joy. But eventually, the routine dulls the emotion. The mind adjusts, expecting the gift without appreciating it. But if one day the gift doesn't arrive, you pause, you notice, you wonder. And suddenly, what had become ordinary now feels precious again. The same happens in human interaction. Constant messaging, frequent calls, and endless availability reduce emotional novelty. The brain habituates, expecting connection without effort. But silence reintroduces mystery. It rekindles the emotional circuitry that was slowly going numb. It invites the other person to participate rather than simply receive. Yet for many, the decision to stop reaching out feels like abandonment. They fear losing the connection. But what is often missed is this: when you are the only one holding the thread, you're not in a relationship, you're in a performance. And performances, no matter how skilled, can't sustain intimacy. The shift begins with awareness. Ask yourself, not with judgment, but with compassion, why do I feel the need to always reach out? Is it love or is it fear? Am I truly connecting or am I managing someone else's silence? The answers are often subtle, buried beneath years of emotional habits and relational patterns. There's a phrase in Eastern practice: sit with it. Sit with the urge to text. Sit with the silence. Sit with the space that feels uncomfortable. Because in that space, you will hear what your emotions have been trying to say. Maybe you're afraid of being forgotten. Maybe you're afraid of being unloved. Maybe you're afraid of seeming indifferent. But none of those fears go away by overcompensating. They dissolve through clarity, through stillness, through inner listening. One woman, aged 58, shared her journey after a divorce. She said, "For years, I thought reaching out meant I cared. I thought silence meant losing them. But then I realized I was always the one trying to keep the story going. The moment I stopped, I feared the story would end. But it didn't. What ended was my exhaustion. What began was peace. Peace doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from aligning with your own energy. When you stop texting and calling, you don't vanish. You reappear to yourself. You stop leaking your energy outward and begin directing it inward. That inward movement is not withdrawal. It's recalibration. People often wonder, will he notice? Will he care? Will he come back? These are natural questions, but they point outward. The deeper questions are, what am I noticing about myself now that I'm not chasing? What emotions surface in this stillness? What truths have I been avoiding by staying busy with communication? The outer questions may or may not find answers, but the inner ones always do. And here, another layer unfolds. Desire is not only shaped by availability, but by contrast. You understand the value of light when you've known the dark. You recognize the beauty of connection when you've sat in solitude. And men, like all human beings, are wired to notice change. When your pattern shifts, their attention is drawn to the disruption. Not because they are always conscious of it, but because the subconscious mind tracks patterns. If every morning begins with your message, its absence disrupts the cycle. And in that disruption, reflection begins. Did I miss her presence? Why hasn't she reached out? Was I taking it for granted? These questions, when felt sincerely, are the doorways to emotional growth. Not only for them, but for you. It's important to understand that space isn't rejection. It's not a punishment. It's a reset. And that reset doesn't guarantee someone will return. But it does guarantee that you return to your strength. You return to your natural rhythm. And in that rhythm, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because stillness has a gravitational pull. There is a quiet power in not chasing. It's the power of self-possession, the power of standing in your own energy without begging to be seen. The world moves quickly. People seek validation, attention, confirmation. But the ones who remain centered, who communicate through presence, not pressure, those are the ones who are remembered long after the noise fades. When you stop texting and calling, you are not abandoning the relationship. You are giving it space to reveal itself. Will it contract or expand? Will it wither or deepen? These are questions you cannot answer by force. Only time and silence can reveal them. And as you shift your focus inward, you begin to see another truth. Emotional discipline is not about withholding. It's about choosing. Choosing when to act from love and when to rest in it. Choosing not to react out of insecurity. Choosing to allow silence to speak on your behalf when words would only blur the truth. This choice does not come easily at first. The mind will scream. The body may ache. Old wounds may resurface. But with each moment of stillness, you train yourself in the art of emotional freedom. Now let us turn to another powerful element at play in this unfolding dynamic. The way the brain processes attention, novelty, and emotional space. When someone receives consistent attention, the brain's reward system normalizes it. The relationship begins to feel routine, predictable, expected. There is comfort in that, yes, but also complacency. Yet when that attention is withdrawn, without drama, without announcement, the brain does not interpret it as punishment. It interprets it as loss. And in processing loss, the brain does what it is wired to do. It reflects. It reviews past interactions. It recalls moments that were once overlooked. This is not manipulation. It is biology. But what determines whether this reflection leads to reconnection or release is the intention behind the silence. If your silence is rooted in anger, it becomes a wall. If it is rooted in self-awareness, it becomes a mirror. And mirrors reveal far more than walls ever will. There is a scene from a traditional tale about a monk who stopped speaking to his disciples for several days. They grew restless, confused. Some thought he was ill. Others thought he was upset. But then one day he broke the silence and said, "Now you see the truth, not of me, but of yourselves. In my silence, you met your thoughts, you met your fears, you met your assumptions." This is where the real teaching begins. The same principle applies when you stop texting or calling someone. You are not withdrawing love. You are withdrawing noise. You are allowing truth to surface in its place. The most mature relationships are not built on constant communication. They are built on understanding that presence can be felt even in absence. That love is not measured by how often we speak, but by how deeply we listen, even when nothing is being said. And this kind of listening, both inward and outward, requires trust. Not in the other person necessarily, but in life itself. Trust that what is meant to stay will stay. Trust that what is aligned will return. Trust that your silence is not emptiness, but fullness. Because in the end, every relationship is a mirror. And when you step back, you offer the clearest reflection. Emotional discipline is often misunderstood. Many think it is about suppression, about denying how you feel, about silencing your heart, about pretending not to care. But emotional discipline is not about becoming hard. It is about becoming wise. It is the ability to feel everything, yet not let those feelings dictate your actions in a way that dishonors your peace. When you stop texting and calling someone, not out of anger, but out of inner clarity, what you are practicing is emotional discipline. You are teaching yourself that connection is not maintained by desperation, that love is not sustained through constant reminders, but through mutual presence. And in doing so, you return to your own center. You move from reaction to response, from anxiety to awareness. The modern world encourages immediacy. If someone doesn't respond, we check. If a message is seen but not replied to, we wonder. And if a day passes without communication, we panic. But emotional maturity understands that silence is not a threat. It is simply a space, one, that can either be filled with worry or with wisdom. That choice is always ours. There's a woman named Dana who spent years over functioning in her relationships. If someone she cared about didn't text back, she would send another message. If she felt a shift in tone, she would overanalyze every word. Her emotional life was tied to the behavior of others, and it exhausted her, not because she loved too deeply, but because she hadn't yet learned to anchor her emotions within herself. Then, one day, something shifted. After another sleepless night filled with worry and self-doubt over a man's lack of response, she chose differently. She sat in the discomfort. She breathed. She asked herself, "Why am I so afraid of being quiet?" And in that silence, she met herself, not the anxious version of herself who chased and sought answers, but the part of her that had always been calm, always been wise, always been enough. From that moment on, Dana still cared, but differently. She began to give space, not as a strategy, but as a boundary. She learned to hold her emotions like sacred guests, not as invaders demanding reaction, but as signals guiding her towards self-respect. That's emotional discipline. It is choosing peace over panic, choosing clarity over chasing, choosing stillness over seeking. In relationships, it often feels like the one who cares less has more power, but that is not true power. That is detachment born from fear. True power is the ability to care deeply and still choose silence when needed, to love fully and still walk away when love is no longer mutual, to feel longing and still not beg. That is the highest form of strength, and this strength, this quiet dignity, speaks louder than any words you could say. When you no longer need to explain your worth, when you no longer rush to fix what isn't reciprocated, you radiate a presence that is unforgettable, not because you are withholding, but because you are whole. People sense this. Even if they do not understand it logically, they feel it energetically. When you are emotionally disciplined, your energy becomes clean. You are no longer trying to convince, to chase, or to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. And that energy changes everything. A man may not notice when you are constantly available, but he will notice when your energy shifts, when you stop over-giving, when your voice grows calm, when your eyes no longer search for reassurance. That is when your presence becomes powerful, not because you withdrew love, but because you withdrew from imbalance. Emotional discipline also teaches you to stay with your discomfort without reacting. When you feel the urge to send that message, to ask that question, to seek that closure, pause. Ask yourself, is this coming from love, or is it coming from fear, from expansion, or from contraction? The body knows, the heart knows, and when you listen carefully, you will hear the difference. There is a short teaching in Zen philosophy. To hold water, you must cup your hands gently. Grip too tightly, and it slips through your fingers. The same applies to love. The tighter you cling, the more it escapes. But when you hold love lightly, with openness and trust, it stays, not because it's forced, but because it's free. This discipline extends beyond romantic relationships. In every connection, friendship, family, work, there is a line between genuine care and emotional overreach. When someone constantly crosses your boundaries or takes without giving, the temptation is to try harder. But sometimes trying harder is not the answer. Trying less and trusting more is. You teach people how to treat you not through lectures, but through energy. When your energy is rooted in self-respect, others rise to meet it or fall away. Either outcome is clarity, and clarity is more valuable than closeness. Because not everyone who is close is truly connected. There is another layer of wisdom here. Stillness communicates strength louder than words. In a world obsessed with noise, stillness is revolutionary. When you can sit with yourself, truly sit without distraction, you begin to cultivate an inner presence that is magnetic. You no longer need to fill silence with messages or fill gaps with explanations. You are content, and that contentment is deeply attractive. Men are especially responsive to this kind of energy, not because it is manipulative, but because it is rare. So many relationships are built on emotional urgency, on checking in, fixing, pursuing. But when a woman stands in her own energy, not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary, she invites rather than demands. She attracts rather than chases. There's a story about a man who dated a woman who never seemed desperate for his attention. She was warm, present, and caring, but also grounded. When he pulled back, she didn't panic. When he took space, she didn't fill it with noise. At first, he was confused. He was used to women seeking his attention, trying to win him back, but this woman simply let things be. And in her stillness, he felt something he hadn't felt before: respect. That respect turned into admiration. Admiration into curiosity. Curiosity into love, not because she tried to change him, but because she refused to betray her own peace for his approval. Stillness is not passive. It is a form of deep listening. It is the space where you meet yourself again, when you no longer define your worth by how others respond. You enter a realm of power that is quiet but unwavering. A woman in stillness is not invisible. She is luminous, because in that stillness, she is no longer seeking to be seen. She is simply being. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It must be lived. It must be cultivated through daily choices. Choosing to sit in silence instead of sending that fourth message. Choosing to reflect instead of react. Choosing to walk outside and feel the wind instead of refreshing your phone for the 10th time. When you do this consistently, something extraordinary happens. Your nervous system calms, your mind clears, your energy shifts, and those around you sense it, even if they can't explain it. You become the still lake that reflects everything around it without trying. You become the calm in the storm. This is why silence is such a powerful teacher. It strips away illusion. It reveals who truly values you and who only valued your effort. It shows you where the connection was mutual and where it was dependent. And most importantly, it brings you back to yourself, because the goal of emotional discipline is not to gain control over others. It is to gain clarity within yourself. It is to reach the point where your inner peace is not so easily shaken by someone else's inconsistency, where your joy is not dependent on someone else's messages, where your sense of self remains intact, regardless of who stays or who leaves. To live this way requires courage. It is not easy to sit in silence when your heart wants answers. It is not easy to stop reaching out when your mind screams with uncertainty. But each time you choose stillness over struggle, you build a deeper kind of trust. A trust in yourself and a trust in life. And this trust is the foundation for true connection. Because only when you are whole within can you invite someone to meet you there. Not to complete you, but to join you. Not to fill your silence, but to walk with you in it. The world does not teach us this. It teaches us to chase, to prove, to perform. But there is another way. A quieter, stronger, more grounded way. It is the way of emotional discipline and stillness. And those who walk it do not need to raise their voices to be heard. Their presence speaks for them. There is an undeniable truth that becomes evident when you begin to observe human behavior, not through emotion, but through still awareness. People do not value what is always available. And this is not a cynical outlook on life. It is not a reason to become cold or closed. Rather, it is an invitation to understand a fundamental pattern of the mind. When something is scarce, it appears more valuable. When something is abundant, without boundaries, its presence becomes expected, not appreciated. In relationships, this manifests in subtle and profound ways. A woman who is always texting, always initiating, always emotionally available, without first assessing if her energy is being reciprocated, unintentionally trains others to believe that her presence is a constant. And in the presence of constant availability, desire begins to erode. Not because the love is any less, but because the polarity, the energetic tension that sustains attraction, becomes flat. When you pull back, when you stop texting and calling, when you no longer fill the silence with effort, you disrupt that pattern. You no longer feed the illusion that your time, your energy, your emotional investment are without cost. And in that shift, something powerful begins to happen. The other person is invited to step forward, to participate, to reach, because the dynamic has changed. They must now earn what was once freely given. This is not about playing games. It is about self-respect. It is about honoring your own value in a world that constantly encourages you to seek validation through being needed. A woman who understands her value does not hand it out in hopes of being seen. She offers it when there is alignment, when there is mutuality, when there is depth. The mind is wired to seek what requires effort. This is not just emotional, it's neurological. In a series of behavioral experiments, researchers found that when individuals had to work harder to obtain a reward, they rated it as more pleasurable than when the reward was handed to them effortlessly. The brain's reward system lights up more when effort precedes the reward. This is called the effort justification principle. In the realm of relationships, it means that when someone has to reach for you, when they have to reflect, adjust, or pursue to keep your presence, they appreciate it more deeply. But when everything is handed over without pause, attention, time, emotional depth, it becomes background noise. And this, unknowingly, is where many women lose their sense of power. They give from a full heart, but forget that unchecked giving can diminish perceived value, not in truth, but in perception. There's a story of a woman named Mira who had always been generous in love. She believed that loving someone meant being endlessly available, anticipating their needs before they were expressed, staying connected throughout the day. She did this not because she lacked boundaries, but because she equated love with effort. The more she gave, the more she felt she was loving well. But over time, she noticed something unsettling. The man she was seeing became less responsive. He answered, but not with enthusiasm. He showed up, but not with presence. The more she leaned in, the more he leaned out. Confused and hurt, she decided to step back, not as a tactic, but out of exhaustion. She stopped sending the good morning texts. She stopped filling the space. She returned to her own rhythm. Days passed. Then a message came, "Is everything okay? I noticed you've been quiet." It wasn't just the message that mattered. It was the energy behind it. For the first time, he had to notice. For the first time, he had to reach. That moment revealed something. Essential value is recognized in absence. Appreciation is born in contrast. This does not mean one must play hard to get, but it does mean one must not be afraid to be still, to allow space, to trust that what is meant will not vanish, and what fades in silence was never rooted in depth. The value of your presence is amplified when you are not constantly offering it uninvited. Let others feel what it's like when you're not the one maintaining the connection. Let them experience the contrast. Men, in particular, tend to respond more strongly to space than to pressure. When a woman is always initiating, she is perceived as dependable, yes, but also predictable. And predictability in excess kills mystery. And where there is no mystery, there is no magnetism. It is important to understand that creating space does not mean withholding love. It means offering it with intention. You are not withdrawing affection. You are withdrawing from imbalance. There is a difference. One creates clarity, the other creates confusion. And clarity in relationships is often found in silence more than in speech. Now imagine a man who receives daily validation, attention, and emotional availability from a woman who expects nothing in return. At first, he may feel flattered, even admired, but slowly, the scales begin to tip. He begins to take it for granted. The attention becomes routine. The messages lose impact. He no longer has to wonder, no longer has to reach. The connection loses its tension and therefore its fire. Then, one day the messages stop. The attention is gone. The emotional presence is no longer freely offered. At first, he may feel relief, less pressure. But soon after, a shift occurs. He begins to feel something unexpected: absence. And absence, when felt by a man, becomes the catalyst for awakening. He begins to ask himself questions he never considered before. Why do I miss her? What did she bring into my life? Why do I feel unsettled without her presence? These questions do not arise in noise. They emerge in stillness. They are born when something is removed, not as punishment, but as a mirror. In that mirror, he does not just see her. He sees himself. He sees how he responded, how he showed up or didn't. He is given the space to notice. And in that noticing, something else begins to happen. He starts to remember. He remembers the kindness, the tone of her voice, the way her presence made him feel anchored. But he also remembers that he never had to earn it. And that realization, if he is awake enough, humbles him. It stirs him. It causes him to wonder if he ever truly deserved her attention in the first place. This is not about causing guilt. It's about awakening reflection. When you stop offering yourself where you are not valued, you become a catalyst for awareness. Not only for them, but for yourself. You start to see who steps forward when you step back, who notices when you're no longer carrying the connection, who reaches when you're no longer extending. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: what you don't say teaches more than what you do. Silence has its own language. It speaks not in words, but in vibration. In its quietness, it calls forth honesty. In its stillness, it demands presence. A person may ignore your words, but they cannot ignore the feeling of your absence. There's a passage from a lesser-known Eastern parable. A student asked his master, "How do I know if my presence matters to someone?" The master replied, "Leave without a word. If your absence becomes a question in their heart, you have your answer." We live in a time where constant communication is confused with connection. But presence is not measured in frequency, it is measured in depth. You could speak with someone all day and feel invisible, or you could say nothing and still feel seen. True connection transcends words, and often it is only in the absence of noise that we hear the heart speak. Consider a woman who chooses silence, not because she is cold, but because she is full of self-awareness, full of boundaries, full of presence. She does not need to fill the space with reminders of her worth. Her absence is the reminder. Her stillness is the signal. This kind of woman is not common. And precisely because she is uncommon, she is unforgettable. A man may not understand her at first. He may even resist her silence. But in time, he will come to recognize the power in it. He will see that she is not withholding love. She is protecting it. She is not punishing him. She is preserving her own peace. What you don't say becomes your power. Not in silence as avoidance, but in silence as clarity. When you no longer over-explain, over-text, or overextend, you create space for the truth to arrive. And that truth may be painful, it may be beautiful, but it will be real. In that space, he must meet himself. And you, in your stillness, meet yourself too. Without the noise of needing to be heard, needing to be affirmed, needing to be chosen, you begin to listen to your own voice. You begin to hear the rhythm of your breath. You begin to feel the steadiness of your own presence. And when you live from that place, you no longer fear silence. You no longer chase validation. You simply exist in your wholeness. And from that wholeness, you draw toward you only what resonates with your peace. The final echo of this teaching is this: let your absence speak where your words no longer reach. If someone cannot feel your silence, they will never fully hear your voice. And if someone only values you when you are giving, they do not yet understand the meaning of love. Let them learn, not through argument, but through stillness, not through confrontation, but through contrast. Let them come to realize that your presence was a privilege, not a possession. And if they don't, you have lost nothing, because you have already gained the most sacred thing yourself. When you stop texting and calling, when you remove your energy from someone who once had constant access to your attention, something profound happens. Not just to them, but within you. This journey isn't only about understanding the reactions of a man. It is about rediscovering the immense power within yourself. What once seemed like a loss becomes clarity. What felt like silence becomes space for truth. You begin to notice that what you give, your time, your presence, your emotional availability, is not free. It is sacred. And when you protect it, you protect your peace. You begin to walk differently. You speak from a place of quiet strength. You stop seeking validation because you've tasted the wholeness that comes when your energy is no longer entangled in the need for external approval. And slowly, you stop waiting for someone else to come back to their senses, because you've come back to yours. Letting go of constant communication doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're choosing to listen more closely to what your silence reveals. It means you're learning how to meet yourself in the stillness. And in doing so, you finally realize how deeply worthy you are of being met with equal intention. Some will miss you only when your absence is felt. Some will only wake up when your voice is no longer echoing in their ears. That is not punishment. It's a mirror. Let them see. Let them feel. Let them awaken or let them drift. Either way, you've returned to center. The truth is, when you stop chasing, begging, or proving, you start magnetizing. Not because you became someone else, but because you remembered who you've always been. Calm, clear, certain. A presence that doesn't need to shout, because its quiet truth already speaks volumes. And from that stillness, you do not chase love. You attract it. You do not demand respect. You embody it. You do not perform to be seen. You simply shine.